Have you ever heard the term buffer zone black people or the buffer class black people? These are the Candace Owens types, the ones that we often refer to as coons and sellouts. But in the science of sociology, these black people are referred to as members of the buffer zone or buffer class black populations. They act as a buffer between the white society and the black population in behalf of the white society. Nowadays, before black people can even confront the system of white supremacy, we're forced to have to fight against these buffer zone black people that have been brainwashed to defend it. It's the role of these buffer zone black people to perform that helps the system of white supremacy run smoothly and without change. However, these buffer zone black people are unaware that they've been brainwashed to do so. They think it's of their own free will, but it's in fact not. True black liberation will only be possible when black people elevate our minds above a biblical fairy tale and a Willie Lynch myth. When we attempt to liberate ourselves from our real life true oppression based upon easily proven works of fiction, we are in fact making damn fools of ourselves. We must instead elevate our minds to learn the truth. Learn of the true hidden nefarious social science tactics that are being secretly deployed unrelentingly by white oppressive forces for maintaining their social dominance over black people and to facilitate their long-term oppression of black people. This is why those of us who know must teach African proverb. My words of black liberation may now sound outdated or ridiculous, given that millions of black people have been socially engineered to no longer yearn for black liberation, and to instead merely yearn for a comfortable position within the system of white supremacy. This brainwashing now invokes an automatic response among many black people that say that they don't want to hear about that black liberation shit whenever the topic is mentioned. I also realize that trying to get people to accept a black liberating information that their minds have been socialized to reject can be as difficult as trying to feed medicine to the dead. But I'm still going to plant the seed nonetheless, because we must never underestimate the power of planting seeds of truth within fertile minds. While black people study our Bibles, believing that it would protect us, white oppressive forces study instead how to subjugate us without fighting us through their monopoly over information that we receive. The supreme art of war is to subjugate a people without having to fight them. White oppressive forces achieve this supreme warfare objective in their subjugation of black people by deploying information warfare against black people. Information warfare is when one group constantly feeds false information to another group that are designed to change the beliefs and behaviors of the targeted group in ways that are against our own interests and that serve the interests of those who are deploying the information warfare. It works upon the concept that the mind's perception can be altered by controlling the information given to it. The white society controls all official information that black people receive. This allows them to tell black people what to believe. They've exploited this scenario and to create their greatest weapon used for their subjugation of black people. White oppressive forces determined a long time ago that by constantly inundating black people with black racially demoralizing and black racially devaluing propaganda, they can manipulate us to believe that our core problem lies within ourselves. When black people have been misled to believe that our core problem lies within ourselves, this demoralizes us, divides us, creates black self-loathing, and it shifts black collective aggressions away from the white society and redirected towards ourselves. This also not only makes black people more compliant with white dominance over our lives, it in fact, in many cases, causes many black people to even prefer it. It also attacks the core foundation of what bonds us as a people, and we can then be ruled over forever. The white society's core power over black people has always been their ability to create false narratives that makes us think and behave in ways that are against our own interests and that instead serves the interests of the white society. Most people don't understand how controlling people through narrative actually work. So I will therefore give you an example using American soldiers. Whenever the ruling elites wants to go to war for a hidden nefarious reason, they always create a false narrative that conceals their true nefarious reason for going to war. The false narrative is always a positive one that claims that the American soldiers will be righting a wrong. They then present that false narrative to the soldiers. These millions of soldiers then accepts the narratives and starts functioning based upon the narrative as being factual. These soldiers will then feel their patriotic duty to go to another country, travel thousands of miles, and kill strangers based upon the narrative. Some soldiers will lay down their lives in defense of the narrative. It doesn't matter that the narrative is untrue. What only matters is that the soldiers believe that it's true. People live, die, and function based upon the narratives that they've been given and accepted. Likewise, the same social science utilizing false narratives to control the targeted population, to do things against their own interests, is what the white society has done to black people. Our true core problem is that white oppressive forces, with the ability to create false narratives that makes us think and function in ways that are against our own interests, are doing so. Presently, white government agents that specialize in psychiatry and propaganda analyze and studies everything about the black population. Our beliefs, our likes, our dislikes, our strengths, and our vulnerabilities. This surveillance information is gathered and then decisions are made on which fraudulent stories to produce to best create certain psychological feelings among the black population that assist the white society in maintaining its dominance over black people. Its control and dominance over black people. These men now systematically feed us false narratives that are designed to make us think, behave, and function in ways that are against our own interests and that instead serve the interests of the white society. And just like the soldiers in the presented example, many black people accept the false narratives and begin functioning upon it. They control us by keeping us believing the fraudulent, worse narratives about ourselves. It's exactly as the master teacher, John Henry Clarke, said, that to control a people, you must negatively control what they think about themselves collectively. Once people have been made to be ashamed of themselves collectively, you no longer need chains to hold them. People are easily controlled by the narratives they routinely receive about themselves. If people constantly receive positive narratives about themselves, this raises their self-esteem and unifies them and inspires them. However, if people are constantly bombarded with fraudulent negative narratives about themselves, the exact opposite happens. This creates self-hatred and disunity, which attacks the core foundation of what bonds them as a people. Remove a people's self-love and unity, and they can then be ruled over forever. This demoralizing tactic is presently what white oppressive forces are doing to black people. Case, point, and proof. They feed us false narrative exaggerating the issue of black on black crime. This makes many black people perceive ourselves as being our own worst enemies, which then divides our ranks, creates black self-loathing, and shift our collective aggressions away from the white society and redirect it towards ourselves. Keeping us within this condition is how they now prevent us from unifying against them. They also keep telling us that all study results favors themselves over blacks. This is being done to subliminally embed the myth that whites are inherently superior to blacks within our subconscious minds. This makes us more subservient towards whites and more compliant with white dominance over our lives. It's being programmed. Every time we're hearing all study results favor them and not us, it's embedding the myth of their superiority. They also miseducate us to believe that our ancestors were uncivilized and ignorant before the white society invaded Africans. This false narrative makes many of us feel grateful to the white society for having brutally invaded, colonized, and enslaved our ancestors because we ultimately believe that we benefited from it. This propaganda campaign also prevents African Americans from demanding the reparations we are still owed. Because in our subconscious mind, we've been made to feel that the white society's enslavement of our ancestors, we perceive it as more of a rescue mission that ultimately delivered us from a terrible place of Africa. We don't see it as the Holocaust as it was because we've been made to feel indebted to the white society for doing it to us. They manipulate us to blame slavery more upon the wretchedness of we Africans instead of the evil white enslavers by miseducating us to believe that most of our enslaved ancestors were sold off, therefore fairly purchased. However, critically think and look at the facts. If Africans originally owned all the gold, the diamonds, the minerals, the oil, natural resources, and the West had nothing that Africans needed, and Western money had no value whatsoever in Africa, how then was it possible that the majority of the millions of enslaved Africans were fairly purchased? And given all that we now know about the white society, ask yourself, why wouldn't they have maximized their profit by using their weaponry advantage of guns and cannons to forcibly capture most of the enslaved Africans? It's consistent with who they are. When you critically think and apply common sense, rather than allowing the white society to tell you what to think and believe, it becomes clear that most enslaved Africans were not fairly purchased. The white media's unrelenting negative depiction of black people that amplifies the negative to the point that it distorts our reality is much more than just biased media reporting. It's actually a covert, insidious, black racially demoralizing, divide and conquer psychological warfare tactic, also known as divide and rule. Demoralizing, divide and conquer is a method of maintaining control over a targeted population through constant and unrelenting demoralization in order to create self-hatred and division between them. This system is deployed like a massive media marketing campaign that constantly subjects black people to receiving only the fraudulent and worst narratives about ourselves. Within this system, fraudulent, black, racially demoralizing and devaluing propaganda is being pumped unrelentingly into the unsuspecting minds of the black population without being challenged or counterbalanced by an equal amount of positive, black, racially affirming information. It conveys the subliminal message that black people are now our own worst enemies and that we therefore need whites to govern over our lives. Moreover, that black people should admire, respect, and trust only whites. This system is extremely effective because when black people are repetitively presented these noted narratives from trusted white media sources, it can be very difficult to resist its implied programming, especially when the propaganda is being told daily and so unrelentingly. Its weapon is the demoralizing message that it carries and the way that it adversely affects the black population in terms of our behaviors. It is a process with the objective to erode the morale of a targeted population through continuous demoralization. By destroying a group's morale, it can even prevent a group from fighting. It's very effective. No group can be constantly inundated with negative, demoralizing disinformation about themselves and not suffer some adverse effect. With time being unable to refute the constant negative disinformation about themselves, many black people eventually comes to accept those narratives. Many black people then experience profound feelings of humiliation and ask ourselves, damn, why we can't get our shit together? Why we can't get our shit together? This unrelenting humiliation then causes many black people to become demoralized, divided, self-loathing, and resentful towards our own racial group. In the most extreme cases, many will even attempt to disassociate themselves from the other black people. Psychologists call this disassociation. It's a defense mechanism that evolves to put a distance between themselves and from the pain of being humiliated. These are those black people that have been brainwashed to go out of their way to try to show white people that we're not all bad and to seek white validation and white approval. Because they've been manipulated to perceive our own people as being the bad people and to perceive white people as being the good ones, in spite of a brutal history to the contrary. These are the group that are known as the black people are known as the buffer zone. They act as the buffer between the white society and the black population in defense of the white society. This buffer class is comprised of a segment of the black population that has become so demoralized by the white society's negative depiction of our racial group that they become self-loathing and they literally fight against black people in defense of the white society. This is why nowadays, before black people can even confront the system of white supremacy, we're often forced to first fight against those buffer zone black people that are brainwashed to defend it. It's their role to do so. They are used to discredit our merit. When we say something's wrong in America, racism, they put a black head there. No, it's not. Having a black person say it, it devalues our credibility that there's a problem with racism. However, these buffer zone black people don't know they've been brainwashed. They think it's of their own free will, but it is not. Here's a basic example of how these buffer zone black people are created, okay? Imagine that a crew of people were out at sea aboard their very own well-functioning ship, and that it was being followed by another ship, a second ship that was following and constantly broadcasting derogatory messages to the first ship, transmitting messages claiming that the first ship's crew was not, the first ship was not seaworthy and therefore was slowly sinking, that there was a mutiny being planned, that the crew in the first ship was incompetent. With time, the crew constantly receiving all those negative, derogatory messages and deficiencies about themselves, being unable to refute or confirm them, will grow weary, paranoid, and will eventually come to accept the negative assessment about themselves. The taunted crew will begin to internalize those negative things that's being said about themselves. This will subconsciously influence how they react with each other, how they perceive with each other. It will cause them to become resentful towards each other, distrustful against each other. And once they've been demoralized, they start demoralizing each other. They'll even start fighting among each other. The taunted crew may even become so besieged by deep feelings of self-hatred that many may jump into the sea and attempt to swim toward the taunting ship, believing that the taunting ship is superior, even if their ship was in fact the superior ship. Some of these swimmers will even try to disassociate themselves from their fellow members on the ship. Oh, I'm not one of them. I'm not one of them. Those crew members swimming toward the taunting ship will be perceived as traitors and coons and sellouts by the members of us who stay on the ship watching them swim away. But these swimmers are actually the weaker-minded victims of the immense humiliation and demoralization. That their minds collapse. They have weaker minds and their minds collapse under the constant demoralization. Now, this was achieved by merely inundating a targeted crew with negative information about themselves. The stronger mind is stayed on the ship. The weaker one jumps off. No group can be constantly subjected to receiving only the fraudulent worst about themselves and not suffer some adverse effect. This well-proven warfare tactic is precisely what white oppressive forces now deploys against black people. This entire process was achieved by constantly inundating the crew with negative information about themselves. It convinces them to believe that there's something wrong with them, that the core power is internalized. When you believe that your core power is an internalized one, this shifts your collective from your enemy and towards your own, and shifts it towards your own people. The process with the objective is to erode the morale of a targeted population through continuous demoralization. By destroying the morale, it can even prevent their will to fight against their enemies. And it's very effective. As I said before, no group can be constantly inundated with negative, demoralizing information about their group and not suffer some adverse effect. Within a real-world setting, this demoralizing, divide and rule psychological warfare tactic is what white society deploys against black people unrelentingly through the media. This is all possible because people are like computers. All you have to do is keep giving them certain information every so often, and you can persuade an entire generation towards an applied objective. It doesn't matter if the information presented is untrue. Most black people will act accordingly to the information because they've all received the same disinformation about themselves. This psychological warfare system provides the white society with a more proficient method for subjugating black people. For unlike the past blatant Jim Crow and apartheid white racist subjugation tactics that black people could easily identify and therefore unify ourselves against and develop counter strategies against, this current psychological warfare system is not easily recognized, nor was it easily comprehended by most of its black victims. It works by affecting the subconscious minds of black people through unrelenting demoralization. It taps into the immense power that shame has upon the human mind to mentally enslave millions of black people. Those black people who do not critically think never notices their mental change. This black racially demoralizing divide and conquer psychological warfare campaign allowed the white society to continue its exploitation and subjugation of black people without any black resistance. The white society's subjugation and exploitation of Africans has provided it with an era which has flourished most throughout history. To allow this era to end would be directly against the interests of the white society, especially given the fact that the white society's dependence upon Africa's natural resources is forever. These factors resulted in the white society exploiting their monopoly over information that we receive to manipulate black people to think in ways that allow the white society to continue its exploitation and subjugation of black people without any resistance. White racism always works best when the black victims no longer recognizes how it works. This is the most proficient subjugation tactic ever deployed against black people. It works so well, in fact, that it makes black people more compliant or white dominance over our lives while insisting that it's we who are our worst enemies. While the white society are deploying the most sophisticated subjugating tactic against us, we're so clueless when we're insisting that we're our worst enemies. The oppressed will always believe the fraudulent worst narratives about themselves. Frantz Fanon said that. You've heard the truth. And you know deep in your heart it is the truth. It doesn't require you to suspend your belief in fairy tales and myths. It's concrete. It's common sense. It's like a lawyer in court presenting his case. I laid it out. I showed the motive. I showed how it was done. Without any, you don't have to, you don't require crazy beliefs to see it. It's common sense and it's who they are. And what I'm saying to you is not consistent with their history. Yes, it is. It's who they are. It's the way they've always been. And it's the only way they know how to be. The white society did not abandon its uses of subjugating black people. They merely developed more covert methods for doing it. It's time to elevate your goddamn mind above this stupid things we're believing and start functioning based on what is fact, what is true. Because if our understanding remains flawed, all of our liberating remedies that stem from those misunderstandings will also be flawed. We must function based on what is true. So therefore we can develop the proper kind of strategies that's required to liberate ourselves. Spread the truth, teach the truth, learn the truth. One love and peace.